Good afternoon. I'm conscious that this is the graveyard shift where there's a sort of a battle in your bodies going on between digesting your lunch and weak coffee to try and stay awake. So with that in mind, I'm now going to talk about my experiences in Qatar, working on the gas to liquids project. And I'm going to talk about safety leadership in the context of a change journey and where we were, where we wanted to be, and how we transitioned from one to the other. And I think it's clear that I'll be upfront with you. I'm not standing here as a safety expert, and you know, today we do have the benefit of listening to safety experts about how they apply certain methodologies to projects. You know, this is taken from my personal experiences as a project manager on the Pearl GTL project. I lived and worked in Qatar for 5 years, and the last 3 were based on site. But before I talk about the change journey, what I want to do is give you a little bit of context. So the Pearl GTL project was built in Ras Laffan, which is a large industrial city about 90 kilometers north of Doha. In terms of the scope of the project, it was 2 offshore unmanned platforms, which we piped about 1.6 billion standard cubic feet a day of gas onshore. And the onshore processing plant turned that into 140,000 barrels a day of gas to liquids product and another 120,000 barrels a day of upstream liquids. And for those of you that don't know Ras Laffan, it's an incredible industrial city that the Qatari authorities have built. It's about 15 kilometers wide by about 10 kilometers long. And this is the economic engine of Qatar and where all the gas processing facilities are. So we sanctioned the project in the middle of 2006, and the first commercial shipment was in 2011. So it was about a 5-year project, and then there was about another year or so to take it up to full production. And in that time, we burnt about 500 million man-hours on construction, and it had taken us about 1 million man-hours of feed just to get to the final investment decision. And that 500 million man-hours was carried out by, at peak, we had 52,000 people on site. To put that in the Danish context, the population of Greenland is about 56,000. So it was almost the population of Greenland, but instead of being on an island the size of India, they were working on a construction site which was about 1 mile wide by 1 mile long. And we had an additional 340 hectares of laydown area. So it was a physically very large project, and it was also complex in its cultural dimensions. So the 52,000 came from about 60 countries. They spoke about 50 languages. They worked for 12 contractors, and of course each of these contractors had its own culture. And as well as the inherent risks associated with the construction, we also had a large number of risks associated with logistics. So the Pearl village, which I'll talk a little bit about in a moment, was about 6 kilometers away. We had about 42,000 people living there, and every day we had to bring these people to site. And we had about 10,000 vehicle movements on site every single day. So that just gives you a sense of the scale and the complexity of what we were trying to build. So thinking about safety leadership and it as a change journey, I think there are 3 things that you really need for a change journey. The first is a robust understanding of your current reality. And that needs to be where you really are and not where you think you'd like to be. Secondly, you need to create a vision of where you want to be. And thirdly, you need to put in place structures and mechanisms to get you there. So where were we at the end of 2006? Well, I think we had done quite a bit of analysis based on the accident rate that we were having at the time and the anticipated number of man-hours that we were going to burn. And the analysis showed us that we were going to kill 25 people. And this was just clearly unacceptable. So the management team worked incredibly hard to put a number of mitigations in place. So We had a number of the things that you'd expect. We had very robust safety management systems. We had some draconian rules about some of our biggest exposures. One of our biggest exposures was driving, either from the village from the site, but also from Doha, which was 90 kilometers away to the site. And so we said no one in the management team self-drives. Everyone goes by bus, and that was quite controversial at the time. We'd also implemented life-saving rules. I know that Emma's already talked about those in the context of Railtrack, and Benedict also talked about those in the context of Exxon. So we'd implemented those as well. We had mandatory training, mandatory technical training, but also mandatory site inductions. And most important of all, we had management and leadership commitment. You know, we had leaders in Shell that were personally very passionate and committed to everybody going home safely. And we worked very hard with our contractors, and they were similarly, committed to everyone going home safely. And we brought them all together, and they talked about the sort of culture that they wanted on the project. You know, they wanted a culture of care and concern. They wanted everyone to go home safe. They wanted a culture where people felt empowered to speak up, where they followed the rules because they saw the benefit of them. And if people, received an intervention, they did so gratefully because they saw that it came from a position of care and concern, and this person wanting them to go home safe. And they'd even signed a charter, and there it was, and it was hanging on the wall in the offices. So, leadership was behind us. So I think if you'd visited us at the end of 2006 and done some sort of audit, we would have looked in pretty good shape and we'd have ticked all the boxes. And then we had an incident. An Indian worker called Amarjit Singh put his hand inside a piece of rotating equipment that wasn't isolated, and he lost his arm. And I went to visit him in Alcor Hospital. And it was the first time that I'd been confronted with the failure of my safety leadership. And I make no excuses here. It was my failure. I was the construction manager, and I and others had allowed a culture to persist on site where someone thought it was okay to put their hand inside a live piece of machinery. And what's more, people saw him do it and no one intervened. So that was our current reality. Yeah? That was the culture that we had on site. It was unacceptable. It wasn't where we wanted to be. We had 5,000 people on site. It was growing at 500 people a week, and we needed to do something about it. Deciding to change, I think, is hard enough. For an organization to say, look, we're here, it's not good enough, we need to be over there. That, I think, is a step in itself that an organization needs to take. And even when you realize where you want to go, that's still not enough because you need to get from A to B. And I think, the organizations have these adaptive challenges where the complexity and size of them just aren't catered for by your past experience. What you know just isn't going to get you to where you want to be. So we were in a position where we knew where we were, we knew where we wanted to be, but we didn't really know how to bridge that gap. Luckily, at the time, we were working with a consultancy called JMJ, who helped us with their incident and injury-free program, and I think there are a couple of JMJ people in the audience today. And incident injury-free is at its heart a leadership program, and it's a leadership program where leadership comes not from position, not follow the rules because I'm the boss and I'm telling you to follow the rules. But leadership comes from each individual feeling empowered to influence those people around them. And that, of course, comes from the culture that exists on site. And so we started by getting all of the leaders back together again on site and took them through a two-day workshop. And it wasn't an easy sell. And that's not because anyone particularly wanted people to get hurt. But we had very, very experienced contractors whose experience told them that accidents, and this goes back to what Mark was saying, accidents were just inevitable. You're going to have 52,000 people on site working in an inherently risky environment. Accidents are going to happen. And so we needed the leadership to believe in a different reality. You get the results you get because of the actions you do, and you do the actions you do because of the perceptions you have about the world around you and the risks. And so what we needed to do is get the leadership to perceive in a different outcome. And it wasn't just the leadership. We then had, the thousands of workers that we already had on site that we needed to move, and all of those people coming. And so as well as the commitment workshop, we also had this half-a-day incident and injury-free orientation. And this was a conversation, a half-day conversation with everyone that came onto site in their native language about making safety personal and relevant to them, so that they were moved from a position of following the rules because we were telling them to do so, and there were consequences if they didn't, to following the rules because they saw the benefit of it, because they wanted to go home safely, because they were there working, sending money back to their families back home. And so they needed to understand that they needed to go home and see their families and be safe. In addition to that, we also worked very hard with the supervisors, because we realized that the supervisors are key to the culture of safety that exists at the work site. These people that set other people to work, hugely important. And so we had 3-day courses with them where we focused on the 3 key skills that we needed them to have, which was all around giving out work safely, how they correct unsafe work, but also, hugely importantly, how they applaud safe work. And trying to change the conversation from what's wrong, come down because you don't have your harness on and shouting at people, to more of a culture where it's a discussion around, look, what's missing here? And again, this was not an easy transition because we had people on site who'd been working in a particular environment or culture for 10, 15, 30 years. So underpinning all of this was a team, a dedicated team that was just driving the logistics of change. So we put about 100,000 people through that half-a-day orientation, and somewhere between about 7,000 supervisors through the supervisor skills training. So it was a massive logistical effort to do this. But we saw it as completely necessary as to get the message across. Common to all of these sessions was a piece about management commitment. And there was a section where management would turn up, and I'm sure many of you have done this, and you go and talk about what your expectations of the workers are, or the supervisors, and what your commitment as a manager is to them, or a leader is to them. And then what we would do is we would write our name on a piece of paper and our mobile phone number. We would stick it to the wall. And this was an incredible tool, because what it did is it created a connection between a worker and the CEO, because we had the CEO's number on the wall, and he would get texts at the weekend from workers. And so we managed to create a communication channel that not only went right from top to bottom in the organization, but also crossed contractual boundaries. And I think, if you take this into your own context, think about an environment where, someone on your rig might feel able to send a text to the CEO of the platform manager. So we really created this channel, which was hugely valuable to us. Firstly, to demonstrate care and commitment, but also allowed us to understand what the workforce was thinking and feeling. So there comes a point where you have leadership commitment, you have a pretty good idea of where you want to get to, and you also have a mechanism that is helping you to bridge the gap. But then, the energy starts to fade, and I'm sure anyone in this room who's been involved in a change journey will experience that. There comes a point where it just kind of runs out of momentum or feels a bit stale. And so we put a huge amount of effort into re-energizing the safety program as the project developed. And this was one of the very big learnings for me. I wanted to be a good project manager. Yeah? I wanted to plan the work the plan. What I was just completely unprepared for was we had hit this rich vein of discretionary commitment in the organization. In oil and gas terms, we'd hit a gusher. And contractors were coming to us and suddenly making demands of us, saying, look, we don't like the way the supervisor skills course is. 3 days doesn't work for us. We want it in 3 one-day blocks. Oh, and by the way, we want coaching for our supervisors. So we provided that. They also then came to us and said, we would like more of our staff running the courses. So we trained up more of their staff. We then set up local IAF teams. And then the contractors said, well, actually, that's not specific enough. We want local teams to particular areas, to particular construction areas and to particular trades. And then others said, well, actually, why don't we have incident and injury-free champions? Why don't we have these people, these senior supervisors, whose only job is to go around and work with the supervisors and the workers to be safe? And these are above and beyond, the safety professionals that you had on site. But it was all around creating this culture of care and concern. And we also had safety days, and there are a number of pictures on the wall. We also had these safety days which were a celebration of all the work, all the great work that contractors were doing. And we brought Capel Dev to site. Does anyone in the room know who Capel Dev is? Just one or two, yeah. Denmark's not really a cricketing country, but 75% of our workforce came from India and Pakistan, where cricket's more of a religion than a sport. And so if you want to think about Capel Dev, who's the guy in the middle, you really want to think about sort of Bjarne Riis, Tom Christensen, and Kevin Magnusson all sort of rolled into one as a sporting hero, and that gives you a sense of who Capel Dev was. And then we celebrated every safety milestone that we could. So every time there was another LTI-free period, we would turn up for the celebrations, and we would encourage the contractors to celebrate every milestone that they could. And here was another one of the big personal learnings for me, and that was about the value of visibility of leadership in this sort of change journey. Woody Allen said that showing up is 80%, and I think he was right. The value of staying at the camp, being seen to stay in the camp, the value of going to the toolbox talks at 5 in the mornings, the value of turning up to the celebrations, being on stage, handing out the prizes, having lunch with the workers, going to the cinema with them, just being out there was hugely impactful on the change that we were trying to commit. I want to talk about Pearl Village. So this is something that I oversaw the construction of and also managed while I was working in Qatar. Pardon? While I was working in Qatar. Early on, we realized that this culture of care and concern just needed to permeate absolutely everything that we were doing. So we thought, well, in that case, we can't just build a camp. We need to build the Pearl Village. And we started by setting very high standards for the contractors to meet in terms of the accommodation and the facilities that they provided. And then we invested, you can just sort of see it running up the middle of the village. We invested about $25 million in recreational facilities. It was about 14 hectares of land, and we built cricket pitches and football pitches, basketball courts, tennis courts. There was a running track. There was an outdoor cinema for about 700 people, and we also had a training centre there. And this village was managed by about 1,800 people. About 1,000 of those were in catering, and any of you that have worked offshore will know just how important the catering is. And it was important because there were some years where we served 40 million meals. But we also had a camp mayor, and he had working for him a welfare team whose sole job was to organize events. And we would have about 300 events every month, sort of cultural, religious, and also sporting events. There was the fun run, there was the Pearl Village Olympics, which I participated in, didn't do very well, didn't get a medal, but it was just, again, turning up and participating was really important. We also had a training centre, and that's where we carried out a number of the courses, both led the incident and injury-free courses there, but also we did a lot of technical training there and a lot of leadership training for the supervisors and the charge hands. But we also had computer-based training. So in the evening, what you would see is workers would go along and through the computer-based training, learn new skills, and then build up their CV so that they could then take this onto the next project. We also recognized that camp life is not for everyone. So we had 2 full-time psychologists, and these were supported by about 200 camp aunts and uncles. And these are people that workers and supervisors could go and talk to about any sort of social issues that they were having, and the aunts and uncles would listen to them, and if they couldn't help them, would then refer them to the psychologist. So I want to talk about the life-saving rules. I know a couple of people have already talked about them. So whilst we focused on creating a culture of care and concern, it was also important to us that we set a line in terms of a series of rules that were inviolate. And this was based on some analysis we did. So back in around 2007, Shell looked at itself and its competitors and added up all the fatalities of its competitors, and that was less than the number of people that we were killing. So clearly an unacceptable position for Shell to be in. And they looked at the fatalities that we had and realized that about 80% of those came from 12 recurring incidences. And this is what led to the 12 life-saving rules within Shell. And the principle was simple, but a huge cultural shift within our company. And the principle was, if you choose not to follow the rules, you choose not to work for Shell. And why was that a cultural shift? Well, I think there were a lot of people within Shell at the time, and some of you may recognize this from your companies, who thought, no, rules really are important, but they're important for the other guy, not for me. I know what I'm doing. And we just had to move away from that. And implementation of these caused some anxiety. You know, people were worried about driving reporting underground, and people were also really worried about creating a blame culture within the organization. But we put in place a policy of just culture, and Emma talked about that as well, with also within Railtrack. And I think we managed to get the benefits of a safety improvement, and we've seen that within Shell in terms of our fatal accident rate. So we managed to get the benefits of improved fatal accident rate without the blame culture that people were worried that would come along with it. But implementing them, again, was not easy. It took enormous personal and corporate discipline. So we sent about 1,000 people home from the Pearl GTL project for not following the rules. And I had to make a number of these decisions myself. And it's an incredibly difficult thing to do, to reach a point where you just say to someone, look, you're going home, you've broken the rules, I can't have you on my site anymore. And, you know, it's going to impact that person's life in terms of future employment, but also the financial consequences of them being sent home. But the way I managed to rationalize it in my own mind is that I would much rather have the difficult conversation about someone going home than having an incident and knowing that I could have done something about it. That, for me, was just not a position that I wanted to put myself in. Either that person would hurt themselves or that he would hurt those around them. And so it's really great coming today to see that, you know, these aren't only implemented in Shell, but they're implemented in a number of other companies. And also I think these are now adopted by OGP, and OGP have developed them further. And of course what's important is that the life-saving rules are relevant to your organization. You know, these are Shell's 12 life-saving rules based on our exposures and the incidences we were experiencing. So, look, I think I'm almost out of time, but I want to finish just by sort of summing up on a couple of things. Firstly, actually, before tell that, I'm just going to tell a personal story. So I've talked a lot about what we did, and some of you might be thinking, well, look, did it work? But I'm not going to talk about the statistics that we had. Shortly before I left site, I was working on the permanent buildings, and I needed to go in there just to check something, and it was at a time when the buildings had been closed, and there was artificial lighting in there, and so you needed to wear safety goggles, but you needed clear goggles instead of dark glasses, which you needed from outside. And I nipped into the central control room. I didn't have any clear goggles on me. And shame on me, I thought, look, I'm only going to be a minute. I just need to go in, quickly check something, and then I'll be out again. Anyway, I walked in, and I'd gone about 10 feet, and a Filipino worker walked up to me and said, look, I'm sorry, you're not allowed in here with dark glasses. You're going to have to leave. And I was about to say, don't you know who I am? And suddenly, I thought, we've done it. We have now created an environment where actually that's possible. A worker can walk up to, and let's be honest, a white manager and say, you're breaking the rules, not in here. So, I just want to close with these final thoughts. If you're thinking about something like this, there are some things, and my reflections are, you need to be really honest with yourself about where you are, what your current reality is, yeah? Not where you want to be, but where you really are. You need to have a vision about where you want to go, and whether that's articulated by someone like Bernie Ecclestone saying, right, no more deaths, you have to have that clear vision, and it has to be articulated towards the whole organization. You need a mechanism to take you from A to B. You need to be passionate. Unless you are just oozing and radiating passion, yeah, they won't believe you and they won't follow you. And the best way to radiate passion is to genuinely be passionate. And finally, it is a long and bumpy road, and it is an uncertain road from where you are to where you want to be, and so you need to be committed for the long haul. And someone once explained commitment to me this way. They said, the difference between commitment and dedication is the same as the difference between bacon and eggs. Yeah? The pig's committed to the plate, the chicken isn't. And so you need to ask the question, which are you? Thanks very much.